all Q family listeners at home and abroad. Look globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, July 18, 29th Tuesday of 2023, just about 8:03 p.m. in the studios at Q95, the big station. We're live on Facebook and YouTube. Follow us at Q95 FM Radio. The on-air numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Share the live, like our pages, get the latest breaking news and reviews as it happens only on Q95, the big station. As we continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love, of peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. I'm joined tonight by a very distinguished guest, Justice Dr. Irving. Attorney Gabriel Christian will join us just a little bit later, and UDOP President Lennox Linton is here with us. They will provide, I am sure, more insights and specific recommendations to deal with these inappropriate provisions that must be removed from the draft laws proposed by Sir Dennis Byron and replaced by firm recommendations proposed for the draft electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations by Dominica's very own trusted Justice Dr. Irving. I'm sure my guests will also speak about the consequences of having tainted elections that result in bad governance and undue foreign influence, and speak to prospects for Dominica's future economy under good government arriving out of free and fair elections held on a level playing field. You recall Justice Andre in just 1 week compiled a list of 20 specific provisions that reflected the people's ideas and provisions for laws, regulations, and constitutional amendments that square up with what most right-thinking Dominicans want in the revised electoral and campaign finance laws for a reconstituted electoral commission and a strong independent chief elections officer will function and enforce the rule of law without fear or favor, free from political influence from the incumbent administration or from other political forces. Now, as you know, it is widely acknowledged that provisions which require constitutional amendments will take place in due course, but that undertaking must not, in fact, must consider the real urgency of now and must not be unnecessarily delayed. Dr. Andre delivered his report and recommended in just 1 week, in sharp contrast to Sir Dennis Byron, who was paid just about $650,000 or thereabouts to deliver a report and recommendation in 3 months. But he was only able to do so in 3 years for whatever reasons. So who do you trust to deliver what the people want? So Dennis Byron or Justice Irving? I'm sure that most of you will say Justice Dr. Irving. So tonight, Justice Dr. Irving, UDOP President Lennox Linton, and Attorney Gabriel Christian will help us debunk the flaws in the Byron draft laws and decide what to do with the Byron report. As I asked Lennox Linton earlier today on the hot seat, should we shun it or bury it or beautify it? I will ask them tonight to tell us what we must deal with, why we must deal with these reforms without any further delays. Tell us what is it that we need, what is at stake for the people of Dominica. If we don't get these reforms right, will we choose to go the Byron way, or will we choose to go the Irving way? In other words, will Dominicans choose dictatorship, or will we choose democracy? Which way will we go, Dominica? I'm sure that we must trust, and that we all trust Justice Dr. Irving. He produced remarkable results in 1 week that reflect the ideas of the majority of Dominicans. So we will choose democracy over dictatorship, I'm sure. And we will replace the offending provisions that Andre's recommendations in the draft House of Assembly Elections Bill 2023, in the House of Assembly Elections Regulations, the House of Assembly Election Petition Rules 2023, and in the Electoral Commission Bill 2023. My distinguished guests will provide the information and arguments that we can give to any attorney and have them remove the offending provisions in those draft laws and replace them with appropriate provisions that we can all agree will lead to a level playing field, free and fair elections, and good governance that will stop the hemorrhage in our economy. Take it from crisis to recovery. You remember who did that already some time ago? It's a gentleman called Edison James. Lift the people out of poverty and mendicancy and improve their livelihoods and living standards. I'm sure these new people proposed Irving Andre driven draft electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations will meet the satisfaction of the majority of Dominicans who would feel comfortable enough to affix their thousands of signatures to a petition demanding that the DLP regime pass these desired reform laws in Parliament. So it is widely accepted that several of the provisions contained in Sir Byron's draft laws are unacceptable and should not be tabled for consideration or passage by Dominica's Parliament. So I expect that my guest tonight and you, our cherished listeners, will embrace these widely accepted, very specific recommendations or provisions to be included in the draft laws. And I will ask you, our listeners, to help me lay out these reforms in detail again for the avoidance of any doubt so that they are indelibly printed in our memory as what we, the people, really want to ensure free and fair elections. Here are a few of them. Simply put, cleanse the voters list, provide voter ID cards with biometric and other necessary constituency residency data, totally eliminate bribery and treating, disabuse the drafts of the notion of anyone having the ability to vote based on the number of days they visited Dominica, clearly articulate the meaning of residency, the normal place of abode as a sole criteria for being on the voters list, complete re-registration solely in Dominica within a specified period, provide specific campaign contribution limits, establish a campaign period and a robust campaign finance reporting system that ensures transparency and accountability, not only by candidates, but by political parties, the Electoral Commission, and the Chief Electoral Officer. Totally eliminate the infusion of dark foreign money in Dominica's elections, provide severe penalties to punish wrongdoing and breach of electoral and campaign finance laws and regulation by candidates or by elections officers, including the Chief Elections Officer and members of the Electoral Commission. These penalties shall not be subject to being nully prossed by any DPP under any conditions. Equal access to all media by all political parties, expansion of the membership of the Electoral Commission in order to prevent political influence, make a minimum number of 3 debates between party leaders and 1 between constituency candidates, make that mandatory during election campaign period. But I'm sure that my guests and you, the callers, and the folks with us on Facebook and on YouTube, you will make additional recommendations as you see fit. So I look forward to you, our cherished listeners to Q and in the Q family, in Dominic and globally, joining us with in this meaningful conversation with my distinguished guest tonight on the Global View on Q. Meantime, I am sure that Dr. Andre and Gabriel Christian and Mr. Lennox Linton will make the case for the urgency of arriving at a consensus, one crystal clear voice from political parties, trade unions, the private sector, civic organizations, including the churches, on the desired electoral and campaign finance reforms and regulations within a short period of time. I would say maximum the next 2 weeks if possible, and make specific recommendations as to what they believe are imperative provisions in the laws that are more applicable to Dominica's needs in order to bring about this level playing field and free and fair elections that we seek, that will help stabilize our democracy and quell anyone's notion to make Dominica a one-party state at the whims and fancies of any future wannabe dictator. Dr. Andre posited several reasons why patriotic Dominicans, irrespective of their political affiliation, should reject what many allege as Byron's prescriptions for perpetual rule of the current dictatorial administration. I expect that he will revisit those prescriptions tonight and point to the provisions that are considered desirable by most Dominicans and Dominican civic organizations and political parties. So having heard Dr. Andre before, and Lennox Linton before, and Edison James before, and Irving Thomas and Wellis Knight and Bernard Heaton, all of the people who have been on the Global View and Q and contributed to discussions that we've had and the recommendations that have come out of all of these discussions, I'm sure that my other distinguished guests and you, our listeners, will make the case for ensuring that the people of Dominica get appropriate reforms in the legislation that goes to Parliament to create this level playing field and free and fair elections, to secure good and accountable and transparent governance, and fortify the country's democracy. My distinguished guest, I'm sure, will also help us unravel the demystified imperatives for reformed electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations for Dominica, so that Dominicans can sing from the same hymn sheet going forward to secure their demand for free and fair elections to strengthen their democracy and improve the lives and living standards and livelihoods of all Dominicans. So meantime, Dr. Andre, as you'll recall, strongly suggested the dismissal of the current efforts of the DLP regime leader, Mr. Roosevelt Skerritt, and his handpicked political appointee, Dr. Kenneth Daru, to predetermine the results of any consultation. So please stay tuned for another exciting, informative, insightful Global View on Q show. I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. We're coming to some kind of final position on these electoral reforms, and I hope the entire country is logged into what it is that is coming out of those discussions. I'm delighted, as I said, to host this very distinguished guest here tonight. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, and globally, please tune in, stay tuned in, and please call. Okay, join the conversation. We welcome every Dominican and friend of Dominica. We embrace you wherever you are tonight, in every nook and cranny, every village, every community in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console at Q95, directed the traffic. We will take your calls a little later. As you know, the people's voice is always a priority, so call us. So listen, let's get started. And I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre to get the ball rolling, certainly to help us determine where we go from here, the urgency of getting there sooner rather than later, bring about this level playing field and free and fair elections that will help stabilize our democracy and, as I said before, quell any notion making Dominica a one-party state at the whims and fancies of any wannabe dictator, to sustain democracy, build the economy, improve lives and livelihoods, take the people of Dominica out of what appears to be a never-ending cycle of poverty and mendicancy that we are witnesses. So, Dr. Andre, I would ask that you please unmute your mic and you get the first word.
Thank you, Mr. G, and good evening to Mr. Linton. Good evening to Lambi. Good evening to Sherwin in the back. Good evening to your listeners. Good evening to the station. And let us say that every day when we have a voice, we should be praising whoever is upstairs for giving us the benefit of being able to articulate ourselves and to comment on issues which are very material and important to our future well-being as a young nation. I can indicate to you, Mr. G, that in the last few weeks, despite the torrent and the savagery of the attack on us, those who have had the audacity to talk about meaningful electoral reform, we should take pride in the fact that we must have struck a raw nerve to engender the ferocity of those types of attacks, we know that we're making progress. If we did not engender any vicious reaction, then we would know that we would be singing from the same hymn book as the political directorate. And that is exactly where we do not want to be. So, for those who believe that they could attack me, I will give them more grounds to attack tonight, because I'm going to hit you head on with all the arguments that you do not want to hear. You will hear them from me tonight. We must prosecute this fight for electoral reform. We have to do it for Vescott Jones, who was summarily dismissed from his job for doing his job, not for being derelict as a former director of audit, not for being derelict in his own job, fired for doing his own job. We owe it to those who worked at the Public Works Department, who have been starved out of employment, so that what they used to do and how they used to earn their living has been farmed out to cronies and relatives of the political directorate. We owe it to Attorney Gilden Richards, who received a court order, a judgment against the government for $700,000 in 2018, and who is still waiting to be paid by the authorities, despite the fact that Cabinet approved the payment years ago. We owe it to those former ministers who have privately and publicly mourned the death of democracy and our leaders' dasse-collé with dictatorship. We owe it to those denied jobs and opportunities because they are perceived to be opponents of the regime. We owe it to those who had to depart our shores because they have been denied a chance to earn a living in a land where their navel string is buried. These are some of the goals that motivate us. These are some of the goals that animate us in seeking electoral reform without delay. We may have different views about what can be saved or salvaged in the Byron report. Some may think, Mr. G, that 80% of the report is good. But good for who? Is the refusal to specifically mention that paying the airfare and seafare for overseas voters to vote for your party's bribery, is that good for democracy, or is it good for dictatorship? Is providing the Electoral Commission, which is controlled by the government, with the discretion to willy-nilly increase the amount of campaign spending, is that good for democracy, or is it good for dictatorship? Is refusing to give all parties access to both public and private media during an electoral cycle, is that good for democracy, or is it good for the protruding stomach of dictatorship? Is the ability to spend millions of dollars in secret preparations for an election before the election is called, is that good for democracy, or is it good to fill the pockets and the pot bellies of dictatorship? Is it good for those who are being daily savaged on radio by the beneficiaries of this assault on democracy to say that we will punt some of the much needed electoral reforms that are life jackets for our democracy? Should we wait to agitate for electoral reform and therefore give dictatorship an opportunity to grow even deeper roots into the landscape of Dominica? Should we wait to agitate and therefore perpetuate the belief that no violation of democracy and the treasury can be stopped? The world has known the tragic results of appeasement rather than activism. The British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's policy in the late 1930s of turning the other cheek when confronted with Hitler's murderous lust for power and conquest cost over 70 million lives. How many more shall have to suffer, according to Bob Marley? How many more might have to die at our main hospital because of a lack of equipment or medicines before we can take the basic steps to rescue our democracy? How many fire bombings do we have to bear witness? One can be innovative in instituting electoral reform, but not at a cost of smothering or strangling the votes of persons who are ordinarily resident in Dominica. Who are the voters who meet the criterion of being ordinarily resident in Dominica? Let me provide you, Mr. G, with a number of generally accepted definitions of that phrase. 1. Ordinarily resident means a person who lives and has lived continuously in a community for an indefinite period. 2. Ordinarily resident is where the person has his usual or principal residence. 3. Ordinarily resident means a person who actually lives and has lived continuously for at least one full year in a particular community. 4. Ordinarily resident means the place where, in the settled routine of a person's life, that person regularly, normally, or continuously lives. 5. Ordinarily residence means the home or place where a person normally lives and to which he returns after any period or temporary absence. 6. Ordinarily resident means the place in which an individual or customarily lives, i.e., their real home, as opposed to where they unusually or casually or intermittently stay. 7. Ordinarily resident means the place of an individual. That individual regularly, normally, or customarily lives. 8. Ordinarily resident. It means a person who has lived the majority of the past in a particular location, even if he or she has to travel either for military service, medical service, incarceration, or vacation, provided that that person returns to the place where he regularly resides. A Canadian case, Supreme Court of Canada over 50 years ago, has offered this following definition, which has stood the test of time for decades. Quote, a reference to the dictionary and judicial comments upon the meaning of these terms indicate that one is ordinarily resident in the place where, in the settled routine of his life, he regularly, normally, or customarily lives. One sojourns at a place where he unusually, casually, or intermittently visits or stays. In the former, the element of permanence; in the latter, that of the temporary predominates. So the whole question or the definition of ordinarily resident has one constant theme: the place where you permanently reside, not the place where you visit, or not the place where you go for honeymoon, or not the place where you go to run carnival, but the place you return to. There is no mystery about that definition. So creativity and innovation in determining voter eligibility for Dominicans in the diaspora cannot and should not be achieved at the expense of voters who are ordinarily resident in Dominica. Now, how can it be fair for Dominicans abroad to be given free passage to vote in Dominica and return to the adopted country, where these election tourists receive assistance if unemployed, or do not have to bring their own toilet paper, Mr. G, linen, or paracetamol to their local hospital if they fall sick? How can it be fair if you can fly in and fly out after voting in Dominica, if you pay absolutely no income tax or social security in your island? Basic fairness dictates that Dominicans abroad should not be cynically used and abused to distort or skew the election results in Dominica. Basic fairness dictates that it is only if voters abroad are limited to voting in one or two virtual constituencies, as Rosie Douglas contemplated, where they cannot determine the voting outcome in any constituency other than the virtual constituencies, can fairness, innovation, and creativity be wedded to achieve free and fair elections in Dominica? Let me address one argument being made by the disciples of duplicity and deceit about overseas voters. Over the past few weeks, they have been saying that St. Kitts' laws permit overseas voters to vote in that country's national elections, and that it is not true that all Caribbean islands have disallowed overseas voters. Not surprisingly, you cannot place any weight on what these disciples say about electoral reform or anything related to it. The St. Kitts National Assembly Elections Act at one point defined an eligible voter as someone over 18 who is, quote, ordinarily resident in a constituency on the registration date, end of quote. Section 37B of that legislation also stated, a citizen of St. Christopher and Nevis of 18 years old or upwards whose name appears in the register of voters for a constituency and who is ordinarily resident overseas and has a domicile in St. Christopher and Nevis in accordance with Section 78B. By virtue of these two sections, Kittitians and Nevisians ordinarily resident overseas could vote in the island's general election. By 2017, however, the Harris government realized that these provisions were nothing more than a millstone around the neck of their democracy, which could be manipulated and manhandled. The Harris government therefore tabled an amendment to the National Assembly Elections Act to provide that to be eligible to vote in general elections, a voter must reside in a constituency for 6 months before registration. In other words, no overseas resident can fly in a day or two before the election, vote, and return to the country where they were ordinarily resident. The bill also sought to abolish Section 38(7)B, which permitted Kittitians and Nevisians ordinarily resident overseas to vote in their general elections. The disciples of deceit and deviousness who have been saying that overseas residents of St. Kitts can vote in the islands are therefore repeating a tale told by fools, end of quote. There are two important aspects of this legislative change in St. Kitts that are relevant to Dominica. The Attorney General, Mr. G, who spearheaded this amendment in the St. Kitts Parliament, is no less a person than, do you want me to tell you now, Mr. G, or do you want me to wait till next month to tell you?
Well, I can't wait. Tell me now.
Is no less a person than Vincent Byron Jr., the brother, for God's sakes, of Sir Byron. Now listen to what Vincent Byron Jr. told the Parliament. Quote, there were 34,000 persons in St. Kitts and Nevis who were 18 and over and therefore eligible to vote. I think in another speech he revised that to 43. There was 9,000 Kittitians overseas who were also eligible to vote. In other words, more than 20% of the voter population lived overseas. Here is what Byron Vincent Sakinoy Jr. had to say. Quote, we have to go back to the drawing board and determine if someone can fly in on a Sunday night, vote on a Monday, and fly out on the Monday night. We need to have a national dialogue on that issue. So that's if Fueki got his house up. His brother, that's what the brother said, told Kittitians.
So are you trying
We
to
need
tell me,
to.
you're trying to tell me that so then he's not talking he vexed with his brother, or they're not talking?
I don't get involved in people's family business.
Oh, okay.
But this is what the Attorney General told his nation. It is patently unfair that where 20% of eligible voters lived overseas, it is unfair for them to fly in on the day off or the day before, vote, and return on the day after. That cannot be allowed to persist. Say, Fueki this house out. Now, there are two other, as I said, there are two important aspects. The second, listen to this carefully, Mr. G. After these amendments had carried the day, one Eastern Caribbean Prime Minister told many of his island's overseas residents on November 11th, 2018, quote, "As long as I am Prime Minister of this country, we shall defend your right under the Constitution of Dominica to vote in Dominica's election." What Prime Minister Skerrit meant to say is that I will break every law to make sure I remain Prime Minister of Dominica. But didn't somebody say that no constitution can stop me from being a candidate in an election? So here's the big defender of the Constitution, the one who says with great dismissal, no law or constitution can stop me from participating in an election. Ah, Lord have mercy. What should we do with the Byron report? We can use a legal fillet knife and cleanse it of its entrails that we normally discard before transforming a white-tailed tuna into a hearty meal. Or we can do a contractor tasked with repairing a home with a weak foundation, pull it down and build a monument to democracy and to the rule of law. In the spirit of conservation and in the spirit of salvaging what we've already spent, over $600,000, the ideal situation would be the cleanse, not just the voters list, but the Byron list. We can do so while boldly proclaiming that it is Dominica's taxpayers to whom we owe a duty of care, to whom we must give the best of our professional experience and advice, rather than the need to please any leader. Let us give to Dominica what A.G. Byron has given to St. Kitts: the freedom for Dominicans ordinarily resident in Dominica to chart their own future by exercising their own freedom of choice. Make no mistake about it. Some reforms are more urgent and easily attained if we have the political will to make the necessary changes. These include A, cleansing the voters list of all dead people and those who have been ordinarily resident abroad for more than 5 years. B, removal of any provision in the Byron proposals for overseas registration of voters. C, enacting the need for voter ID cards rather than national ID cards. D, imposing strict limits on electoral spending for 6 months before an election is called and for the period after the election is called. E, all political parties should have unrestricted access to both public and private media in Dominica. F, specifically noting that the paying of travel expenses for voters to travel to Dominica to vote for the payer or his party is a criminal offense, punishable by a fine, term of imprisonment, or disqualification from contesting elections for a minimum period of 5 years. G, restricting eligibility to vote only to those who have been ordinarily resident in Dominica for 6 months prior to registration. Those reforms that require more time to see daylight because they involve a reform of the Constitution include the following. A, restricting terms of employment, restricting terms of office, to 2 consecutive terms. B, limiting the powers of the DPP regarding the prosecution of breaches of Dominica's electoral laws. C, altering the composition of the Electoral Commission. D, setting a fixed date for general elections. E, introducing an element of proportional representation to ensure that all executive power does not repose in the hands of an executive prime minister. F, creating 2 virtual constituencies where Dominicans ordinarily resident abroad can choose 2 representatives to advocate on their behalf in Dominica's parliament. Now, Mr. G, it has often been said, or it has been said recently, that even Edward Oliver LeBlanc contemplated importing overseas Dominicans to vote. I'm told that he said as much in 1974. The cruel irony is that he left. He voluntarily walked away in June of 1974. He had a very large victory in 1961 when he defeated the DUPP. He had a massive victory in 1966 when he trashed again the DUPP. In 1970, he also had a unprecedented victory, even after three ministers of government left his party. In 1974, he walked away, Mr. G, with less than $100 in his pocket. During all these electoral victories, he never imported not a single overseas voter to come to vote. Go ask his family, there some of them are still here. He never saw the need to cheat because to him remaining in office indefinitely or in perpetuity was not in the cards. He had no interest. He didn't believe that holding the office of premier was bequeathed to him by his father, or mother, I should say. He thought, Mr. G, that he was there to serve and to live at his own choosing, at the time of his own choosing, which is exactly what he did. How can anyone, unless a deranged mind, seek to justify violating Dominica's electoral laws by saying Edward Oliver did the same thing? Where is the evidence of that? On the contrary, his whole tenure in office was dedicated to preserving that little estate to Dominicans. Hence his legislation indicating that the beaches of Dominica should be public. Hence his legislation limiting the amount of foreign ownership of Dominica's land. Hence his policy of giving Dominicans professionals jobs as opposed to foreign persons who are looking to fatten their pockets. These were the principal tenets of his rule. So to suggest that there is a comparison of any kind with the policies of Edward Oliver LeBlanc is to basically defame the man. Because what exists now is a total repudiation and rejection of everything the man stood for. I am mindful, Mr. G, of what I have indicated could be injected into the Byron report while exorcising or excising those parts that are inimical to Dominica's democracy. I am mindful where, as here, the OAS, you may recall, lamented in 2019 that of over 50 recommendations it made to make Dominica's elections fair, virtually none had been implemented. So I am mindful that these proposed reforms will not find any favor with the disciples of deception and deceit. But, Mr. G, and I'm coming to the end, I take solace in the fact, as Martin Luther King so eloquently said, that the act of the universe, it bends towards justice. I also take solace in terms of Dominican's ability to write their own stories. I take solace in the following lines of a 1981 poem named Transcending. Was written by the Prime Minister of Lac-Ouset-Lang and strongly supported by Magistrate Ozzie Lewis, his Minister of Communication. And the last verse goes like this, quote, "Give me a pen and let me burn the pages of a book with groans of sorrow, tears of joy for a young, determined nation marching on like an invincible army to the hope of peace and glory. Not by might," according to that song you played, Mr. G, "not by power, not by snipers, not by Navy SEALs will the spirit of a people be shackled to the steel cages of a dictatorship." I thank you.
And thank you, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, for this very, very eloquent presentation. I mean, it's always a joy hearing you deliver. like that. And when we come back a little later, I'm sure we'll go to town a little bit on some more detail of some of those things because it's urgent, it's critical that we do a real job on this thing tonight. Because Lennox, you're a man that is always prepared. There's one thing about you: take your time to prepare. You're not vi. You're not loud tow. You don't just too show too flam. You take your time and look at the facts. That's the real journalist that you are. A learned, experienced, professional journalist that you are. You do your homework, you trust, but you verify. But all these times now, these days and weeks that we have been looking at this whole business of electoral reform, I know that you first of all, you have done what many of the people who are talking have not done. You have read the documents. You've read everything. And therefore, you've been able to extract from those things and arrive at your own common sense decisions. Because Irving, if you turn off your mic a little bit, yeah. And really and truly, in the end, the ordinary person in Dominican will arrive at the same conclusion that we arrive if they give themselves a chance to listen. Common sense will tell them certain things. Common sense will tell them, Lennox, that we cannot give dictatorship more room to grow. We have to do the reforms now. Common sense will tell them, well, you know where a person live. You don't need a big highfalutin anybody to tell you where somebody live, where they reside. You live in Vegas, you know you live in Vegas. You live in Roseau, you know you live in Vegas. The ordinary person know where they live. If you go somewhere to New York and on a little vacation, you coming back home. When you go to work in the morning, you going back home in the evening. So I mean, when we get to those things, I'm sure we will come down to show the ordinary person where it is they fit into the whole process of electoral. What is their role in getting that electoral reform? You know, one of the things that I'm glad that Dr. Andre did tonight, he gave us all these definitions of ordinarily resident. And he showed us, in fact, we're not the only ones who know what ordinary resident means. St. Kitts, this gentleman's, I think Dr. Andre said he's his brother. I had to ask Dr. Andre if his brother not talking to me, because if it's me, I'll just ask my brother, what all you have over there? If I'm son St. Kitts, my brother is the Attorney General. He put a law in there. I say, bro, what all you put in all your I doing a job over there for this fellas for Andre and them in Dominica. Well, give me something to put in ours. I'm sure his brother would have told him, well, boy, this thing there, you have to be resident there for 6 months before you can register. You don't think that is common sense? You wouldn't ask your brother that, Lennox? I would ask my brother that. The point is that, you know, and when the last thing I wanted to say here, Andre, Irving, you wanted to say something? I see that your mic is on, then you might want to turn off your mic. I'm getting some feedback coming from somewhere. But
No,
anyway,
my mic is off. I'm going to put it off again.
okay, all right. So here's the thing, Lennox, and I'm glad that Dr. Andre dealt with that, because every time some people do their homework, they take their time, they prepare, and they come and say, you have a number of people who don't do any homework, who don't read anything, they don't understand, but yet they want to be the persons who are criticizing people who did their homework. So I'm glad that Dr. Andre said what he did about Mr. Edward Oliver Leblanc. That's a man I used to go to his home and play dominoes with Norris Bravo. We used to go down there all the time in Vegas. His son, Edward Leblanc, is one of my very close friends. We talk about his dad all the time. His mom was the nicest person in the world, great hospitality. So Lennox, we know these people. We know Leblanc was not that kind of guy. The last thing on Leblanc's mind would have been to get people from overseas to go. Leblanc's only concern was farmers. Let farmers get rich. Let's get our agriculture going. Let farmers know they have power. We can vote, and we can outvote anybody else. So, Lennox, let me just bring you in now, because I know you have a lot that you're going to share with us tonight. But I want to keep the conversation like this, because why? Because I'm happy that all these people are already with us on Facebook and on YouTube, and all these people are listening to us in every nook and cranny in Dominica. all over the globe, in the Caribbean, everywhere. Many people have told me they're on, right? They're listening. It's important for us to break down this thing in simple, simple terms as you always do. So we can all move with one voice and sing from one hymn sheet as we go along. Let me go over to you now, Lennox. You want to unmute your mic.
Thank you very much, Sheridan. Can you hear me?
I'm hearing you very well.
All right. Good evening, and good evening, Dr. Andre. Good evening, Lambie. Good evening to the listeners to the Global View tonight, Dominican brothers and sisters in the homeland, and those spread far and wide across the globe who have joined us this evening. Let me say, I just came across some information which allows me to make the point that in the last 7 years since 2016, Dominica has received a total of 43,248 citizens. So the population of Dominica in the last 7 years has grown through the economic citizenship program, the citizenship by investment program. The population has grown by 43,248 people, all of whom have the right to vote if only they would come to Dominica, reside in Dominica for a period of at least 3 months before they seek to be entered on the voters register. So if they make Dominica their place of ordinary residence for 3 months, but the fact that they are naturalized Dominicans now through the CBI program, they can in fact get on the register of voters. Whether they will stay on the register of voters because they would have moved their ordinary residence to someplace else after being registered on the voters list, that's another question. But those 43,200 additional citizens in the last 7 years were supposed to have been responsible for in excess of $9 billion coming into the coffers of Dominica, from which we have only seen something in the region of 2.6 billion. So I'm updating now to say that we have an issue with over $7 billion of the people's money that has not been properly accounted for. And much of that money goes into election.
Lennox, do me one more favor. I want you to go over those numbers again. I really want everybody to take a note of these numbers. Start from the beginning of these numbers. That's important.
you you want
You,
to go over the numbers?
you frightened
Okay.
me there.
New citizens since 2016, 1st of July 2016, 43,248. Amount of revenues that should have come into the Treasury of Dominica, $9.8 billion. Amount actually received, 2.6 billion. Amount unaccounted for as of the end of the financial year 2022, 2023, $7.2 billion. And I'm saying that those sums of money are available to the ruling party, the head of the ruling party, through his friends who control that money overseas to finance election campaigns. And he also had a situation where the public purse itself is being abused for election campaign financing for the incumbents. Case in point, 2019, the overdraft of central government approved by the parliament was $36.5 million, during the election year of 2019, that overdraft grew to $187 million. It was $151 million above the limit authorized by the Parliament, before the National Bank was forced to stop extending further overdraft facilities. And then from that excess 151 above the limit, 151 million above the limit, the government turned around and converted $125 million of election year spending into a long-term loan at the National Bank that the people of Dominica are paying back over 30 years. So you have a lot of abuse in the system, a lot of abuse of incumbency, and a lot of abuse of public money for the campaign purposes of the, I'm advised now, it's no longer the Dominica Labour Party, because a former minister of the Dominica Labour Party, a veteran Labour Party politician and former ambassador in the Labour Party regime, has indicated that the party is dysfunctional. It has no elected officers since 2013, and so the entire executive machinery is defunct and non-existent. The party has been replaced by what the Labour Party veteran calls the New Skerrit Party. And I'm making those observations to say that the process of elections in Dominica has to provide protection against these abuses. And so our electoral laws must have something to say about money that cannot be explained, the dark money, the money that comes from God knows where, and the money that comes from the sale of Dominican citizenship that is going exclusively to one party. And it may well be that the time has come for us to consider whether passport selling agents and people who have contracts with the government that are funded by the sale of passports should not be, if they are inclined to contribute to election campaigns, should not be compelled by law to make equal contributions to all political parties. It cannot be that they are using public funds to favor only one political party. So either they are prohibited from contributing, or if they're going to contribute, the law commits them or mandates them to make equal contributions to all political parties. So if it's 5,000 you're given, everybody gets the $5,000. We have to have those conversations because of where we have gone. Who said, or who would have imagined 10, 15 years ago that we'll be talking at this point about 43,248 citizens over a 7-year period who purchased the passports and who can come on the voters register in Dominica should they spend 3 months in Dominica, because there's no prohibition in law barring economic citizens from voting in elections in Dominica. And we cannot have an electoral process that we want to reform but not pay attention to these issues. So I like what Justice Andre has been able to do in terms of summarizing what I think is the mind of the nation, coming from all of those civil society organizations, those individuals and groups that presented themselves to the consultant during the consultation, and all of the recommendations that came through the years from the various observer missions and so on, that we in Dominica agree to, like ID cards for voting, like cleaning of the voters register, which going back to 2008 emerges 2 reforms that the Electoral Commission itself committed itself to. to doing for the people of Dominica. And that summary of Dr. Andre, in my view, is a very good document, is a very good place to focus all our attention so that we have, over the next few weeks, a set of proposals that we all agree on, that we, the people of Dominica, agree on. We, the people of Dominica, represented by our political parties, represented by our civil society organizations, represented by our individuals and intellectuals or academic community, we, the people of Dominica, agree on. And we, the people, have paid for the Dennis Byron consultancy. It was the Prime Minister who suggested that the fee should be the peanut figure of $450,000 and the additional peanut figure of $200,000 for the legal draftsmanship work that was done. But we have paid $650,000. We, the people, not Roosevelt Skerritt, not the members of his cabinet. The people of Dominica have paid that amount of money. And for that money, the people have a report. The people have recommendations. The people have the people have proposals for revising the electoral laws in Dominica, specifically the Registration of Electors Act, the Registration of Electors Amendment, and the Registration of Electors Regulations, the House of Assembly Elections Act, the House of Assembly Elections Regulations. So those 4 pieces of legislation. And the question is, what do we do with what we have? If those pieces of if those bills, as proposed, go before the Parliament and are passed, we are not going to have the reform that we have been talking about, that we have been looking forward to, in order to make our electoral process fit for the purpose of free and fair elections. That's not going to happen. And so there are specific changes that need to be made to these bills as proposed, to allow us to have revised electoral legislation that will give effect to proper reform of the electoral process. So in the Registration of Electors Act, for example, number 1, our electoral process in Dominica must provide for a total re-registration of voters and provisions for cleansing of the voters list on an annual basis. That is something that has to be worked into the legislation. It is not there right now, but that can be done. Number 2, those persons who are ordinarily resident in Dominica, and only those persons who are ordinarily resident in Dominica, and those who are no longer ordinarily resident in Dominica for less than 5 years should be eligible to vote in elections in Dominica. If you're ordinarily resident outside of Dominica for more than 5 years, then your name should be taken off the register. The provisions for that to happen can be made, and the proposals we have before us fixed to allow that to happen. Number 4, no overseas registration of voters, no overseas confirmation of registration of voters. All we need to do is to pull out those provisions in the proposals, the proposed new legislation that provides for that. And 4, in terms of the Registration of Electors Act, there has to be specific voter identification card, not a national identification card, because the consultant himself has agreed that to make the Electoral Commission responsible for the issuance and management of a national identification card would be inconsistent with the constitutional authority given to the Electoral Commission. So it's a voter ID card we're looking for, issued to all eligible voters in Dominica with biometric data that includes facial recognition and fingerprinting. that is not a lot. There's a lot of talk about biometrics in the report of the consultant and in the proposed legislation, but nowhere in the proposed legislation is it specifically required. Is there a specific requirement for what should be on the voter identification card? There's no provision for the inclusion of biometric data. There is no provision for the inclusion of a unique identification number, the voter registration number. There is no provision for the place of the address of the voter. There's no provision for the polling district in which the voter is registered. All of those need to be specifically provided for in the legislation. And those are fixes. We don't have to toss the legislation because of that. We can make these changes. The question is whether we're going to find the political will in the political directorate that will be that was going to use its majority vote in parliament to get what it wants. In terms of the House of Assembly Elections Act, the changes there must allow for political parties, all political parties, to have access to both state and privately owned media in Dominica during election period. If you have any issues with that, we can see what is provided for in the Antigua legislation, the Representation of the People's Act in Antigua, where all political parties have access to all media, not just state media, and there's specific penalties for non-compliance. Our law, our House of Assembly elections that can take care of that with the appropriate changes to the proposals that had been made. Yeah. Number two, fixed limits on campaign spending. We have suggested a maximum spending of no more than $50 per registered voter in expenditure both before and during any reporting period stipulated in the applicable legislation. That again is an easy fix for some legal draftsperson to take what has been presented by Mr. Byron and which belongs to us, the people right now, and make the adjustment. We talk of foreign persons, companies, government, citizenship, sales agents, holders of government contracts, financed by citizenship revenues, expressly prohibited from contributing either directly or indirectly to any candidate or any party during election. Conversely, we could take those citizenship agents and persons with contracts financed by citizenship revenues and mandate them to make equal contributions to all parties. We need to do something like that. In either case, we balance the scales. We get rid of the unfair influence of our money, the money belonging to the people of Dominica, the public of Dominica, going to finance a particular political party as opposed to all political parties. There should be fixed limits on the amount of money that a Dominican or local company can contribute to the election campaign of any candidate or political party. That can be properly, easily provided for by appropriate changes to the wording of the proposals for the bills to go before Parliament that Mr. Byron has delivered. Number 5, the definition of bribery. We have said over and over again, we believe it must reflect the guidance of Halsbury's Laws of England, the 4th edition, volume 15, paragraph 770, page 421, that, quote, the payment or promise of payment to a voter of his traveling expenses on the condition expressed or implied that he would vote for a particular candidate is bribery. One of the biggest taints on the electoral process in Dominica is this bribery and treating that goes on and has hit steroids in the past couple of elections to the point where we basically in a situation where our elections are just being bought out. Now, remember, Sheridan, Irving, Andre, we had an election in 2018 22, a sham election called in the month of December. In 2019, we had an election in the month of December, and we said we didn't have an international airport in Dominica. But Melville Hall was transformed into an international airport with a number of aircraft that were on the ground over a 2 to 3 day period in Dominica, transporting people to come into Dominica to vote today and leave tomorrow. That was in 2019. In 2022, we had another election. But in this election, the United Workers' Party was not participating. We boycotted the election. So there was no need for the Labour Party or Roosevelt Skerrit or the New Skerrit Family Party to bring in anybody to vote. So Melville Hall was quiet. Nobody was coming in to vote. And I'm making an observation to go back to where Irving was earlier. With all of the people who are out there claiming that this right they have, that somebody wants to take away from them. Is it a right that you exercise of your own free will and using your own resources? Or is it a right that is being exercised by persons who are accepting bribes to come to corrupt the electoral process in Dominica? Or to come to affect the result, corruptly affect the results in different constituencies in Dominica? I want to ask the question. If you're not ordinarily resident somewhere in Dominica, and elections in Dominica are about choosing representatives for particular areas of Dominica. If you're not living in Dominica, when you vote in Dominica, you come from the United States, or you come from Canada, or you come from Antigua, or you come from Guadeloupe or Martinique or France or Canada to vote. Which representative are you voting for? The representative you're voting for does not represent you, cannot represent you. The government that will get in office as a result of the election, you're not under the jurisdiction of that government. Whatever they do has no impact on you where you ordinarily reside overseas. Why do you want to interfere? Why do you want to be involved in voting in an election in Dominica where you do not live and where the government's action has no impact at all on you because you're in another jurisdiction under the governance of another group of people? There are a number of Dominicans living overseas who do not want to vote in Dominica, who do not believe that they should be voting in Dominica simply because they respect the people of Dominica, they respect their brothers and sisters in Dominica enough to give them the privilege, the responsibility of voting a government of their choice, of voting representatives of their choice. And so this matter of the residence, which is a provision in the Constitution, the residence qualification, ordinarily resident, and Irving, we're really grateful for the number of definitions you were able to place on the table tonight from various parts of the world, which tell us that ordinary residence is not a place of ordinary residence is not a Dominican invention. It's around the world, known to people who've taken their electoral process seriously, and persons who want to protect the integrity of the vote of the people in a democratic setting. We also have this matter of the breach of electoral laws, which need to be punished not only by fine and imprisonment, but also by disqualification. And we must make sure that that happens. It is easy to make sure that happens in specific provisions in the law. And then where people have a conflict of interest that arises, for example, from the sale of passports or from providing professional services to the government for consideration other than their work as a member of the commission, they should be disqualified. we should be able to do that easily. The law can provide for that. I don't think we need a constitutional amendment for that to happen. And then my position is that these changes can be made in order to make the legislation friendly to the whole idea of proper reforms. Make the legislation deliver proper reform of the process, and make the process through those reforms that we will put in legislation fit for the purpose of free and fair elections of integrity. There's where I think we need to go. And the sooner that Dominica can agree on all of the changes that need to be made to what Mr. Byron has proposed, the better it's going to be for all of us. Now, we have taken the civil approach to finding solutions to this long-standing, very vexing problem of the right of the people of Dominica to free and fair elections being taken away from them. This matter, if it is not resolved, we have been warned by the Caribbean Court of Justice, our apex court. We have been warned that this persistent denial of the right to free and fair elections leads to unrest. It leads to demonstrations. It leads to protest action. It leads to revolt. That admonition is in the judgment, 2022 July judgment of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Go and read it. So it is not Lennox Linton sounding as though he is fomenting strife or problem. It's just that this unrelenting attack on the people's right to free and fair elections cannot be sustained. It's not sustainable. And so as we listen to the conversations of the people from the other side who are insisting and are digging their heels in talking about disenfranchising people, where we're talking about the constitutional qualification for residents, and talking about almost as though they want protection in the law for them to continue to use corruption and manipulation of the process to continue to steal elections in Dominica. And expect that we will hear a lot about this legal luminary, Dennis Byron, who gave the report. And we're going to be asked to behave as though we were handed a Bible on reform that we should accept and implement without question. We are not going to do that simply because we know now, having read the report, that it is not going to deliver what the people want in terms of making our process fit for the purpose of free and fair elections. We can fix it for that to happen, and we will put the specific recommendations before the government. I am concerned. I am concerned at this stage, more than a month after the report was delivered, that we have not heard a single word from the chairman of the Electoral Commission, speaking for the commission as a body as to what's up with these reforms and what is the commission going to do insofar as the proposals affect its constitutional remit of taking care of the registration of voters and taking care of the election of representatives to the House of Representatives in Dominica. 12th of June, these proposals were delivered. We have come now to the 18th of July, and the chairman of the commission is silent. The road ahead for us looks very dicey. I want to repeat, to stay on that course of the civil approach to finding solutions to this problem, this long-standing, very vexing problem for the people of Dominica. It is not going to end well if the sitting administration, if Roosevelt, Sheridan and company continue to want to protect his so-called re-election legacy and therefore subject us, the population, to all of these deformities of the electoral process, which we have repeatedly said we do not want. The clock is ticking.
Yes, the clock is certainly ticking, and I know that we will want to give our listeners an opportunity to make the calls and to participate in the conversation. We want the people on Facebook, and I want to acknowledge all of you who are there on Facebook. All of you are there with us on YouTube. I want to acknowledge you and embrace you and shout you out. Thank you for stopping by and be with us tonight in this. Please call and express your views, ask your questions, because Lambi, you will give out the numbers in a minute, but if the calls start coming in, even before you give the numbers, take the calls. Just make me a sign. Take the calls. Let's take a call, Lambi. Go right ahead.
Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining the Global View on Q. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Lambi. Good evening
Hey, good evening,
to
buddy.
the distinguished members in the House, honorables, Dr. Andre, Mr. G, and others, Lennox.
Right.
There is one of the, while I support the the foreign citizens thing, I think one of the things that we need to pay attention to is that whole Shagaramas arrangement and people coming into Dominica and being qualified to vote in very short time. I think that's a very dangerous thing, and something that we need to look into. Barbados seem to have solved that problem. Nobody has been challenging them. So if they can coexist in the Chaguaramas arrangement, we can do it too. And so I think we like a free port electorally. And given the small population that we have compared to even our close neighbors, I think we have to take a very serious look at Caribbean nationals. I have no problem with people coming and work in our country. That's fine. That we go and work in other people's country. But you see, electorally, we have to take a very serious look at Caribbean nationals and their qualifications to vote in our elections in Dominica. I think this is something that we have to look forward at very seriously moving forward.
Dr. Andre, I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, I agree with the caller totally. The simple fact of the matter is that we have a small population. There are certain jurisdictions all over the world who've taken special steps to protect their heritage from persons who may simply be flooding their particular area for work. The Gulf, the oil-producing states are notorious with respect to the difficulties they've imposed in making persons who've come to work become citizens. Sometimes you have generations of workers who've been there for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years who have not been able to attain citizenship. Now, we're not suggesting necessarily that that is the model we should adopt, but the caller is right. Even in St. Kitts, with respect to Commonwealth citizens, they initiated some changes in 2018, again, to ensure that the integrity of the local vote is maintained. And that's imperative because many persons or many countries have lost their heritage on an account of masses of persons simply coming into the country with their own agenda, with their own value system. And the indigenous culture, the indigenous way of life becomes smoothed. And that is a fate that we have to avoid at all costs. As Attorney General Byron said in St. Kitts in 2018, this is something we have to look at. We cannot simply ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. Because as I said, the integrity of your democracy is at stake. So I agree with your caller totally.
So Dr. Andre, would you do a little homework for us, as you usually do, and do a little investigations and see what it is that we might be able to incorporate in our laws to deal with that problem that some of our neighbors are already doing?
Well, I'll try to. Questions will pay Mr. G, but I'll try to.
Well, I mean, you haven't got supper. What's wrong with that? You don't
You
get to.
can't keep, Mr. G, you can't keep a secret that I told you something in confidence that I haven't had the dinner tonight and that you're repeating it for everybody to hear, for God's sakes.
No, but I thought you said it's
Huh?
tomorrow night. You didn't have dinner. I thought you had dinner tonight. So I didn't think I was giving away a secret. But listen, Lambi, if you don't have any calls yet, I will go on to. But you have a call. Let's take it.
Let me just give out the numbers. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. These are all local numbers. The overseas number is 305-432-9624. Back to you, Mr. G.
Yes, I want to go back to Lennox a minute there. You have a call, Lambi?
Yes, we do have a call. Caller, please go ahead.
Hey, gentlemen, blessings to you all.
Blessings to
That's it.
you.
All right, Doctor, Honorable, and whoever, all the fellas that is inside there.
There's Lennox, Linton there. There is Sheridan, Gregoire, and there is our senior, well, not by age, but by looks, a
Okay.
gentleman called Irving Andre.
Just quickly, gentlemen, correct me if I am, wrong. When the CCJ gave the report having to do, well, it was an outcome of a hearing when they talk about the things, and there should not be another election under all these things. Was Byron presiding over the CCJ, or has he already resigned? Had he already resigned?
Yeah,
He was not the president of the court at the time.
He was not. But guess what? He once presided over that same court who gave that verdict. And based on his knowledge of the matter, for him to put together or penned or write, he get paid anyway. He get paid. That report with so much of the tense in that report, would any of you there agree with me? Are there tense in Byron's submission, his final report?
I mean, I can tell you that I will just say for the record that I have a belief that it is not just Dominicans who dream of a democracy who have some fundamental issues with this report. In my respectful view, yes, there are things. And in my respectful view, some of these proposals, they perpetuate the taints. And that is the problem that I have. I don't think this is willful blindness. What we're talking about, Mr. Caller, Mr. Bless, well, I don't know if he sounds blessed, but anyway, what we're talking about is not rocket science.
Yes, sir.
It's there. I mean, you're an intelligent man, in my view. This is self-evident. And again, I don't know if Lennox has the letter, because in my view, that explains everything. The letter. Let me just say one thing. The letter from Sir Byron to the Prime Minister, in my view, tells us everything we need to know.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Can I conclude?
Yes.
Yes, what I am saying, to me, it was maliciously deliberate, particularly in a mercenary setting, because they get paid. When Byron said to add insult to injury, like his submission of his report can be served as a model for pre-existing terms and conditions for elections in the Caribbean. And Byron came with a piece of garbage and saying, I mean, it's Dominicans that are more stupid, so guess what we'll digest? It can be served as a model for the region. Isn't that criminal in nature? Thank you, I'm sorry.
Well, remember, it's not me that said Byron vexed his brother. Byron brother did all the work he had to do and fix up St. Kitts. If he didn't ask his brother a question, how would he know? I don't know how you know. If you're not talking to your brother wouldn't tell you all the good things he did for St. Kitts that you could do for Dominica. But I mean, just to put it mildly, Dr. Andre, I think when I read that letter that Sir Byron wrote to Prime Minister Skerrit, I think what he put in that report was deliberate. I don't think there were any errors in what he put there. He intended to put those things, and for a number of reasons, whatever reason. But the fact of the matter is, his previous reports did not sound that way. There were things in those reports which gave one the impression that he was going to fix things up and do the right thing and put the right thing. But then, alas, it seems as though this is $650, $650,000 a lot of money, boy.
Yeah, but let's quote the transmitter letter. All right. I recognized this is Dennis Byron to Roosevelt Skerrit in his transmitter letter. I recognize that you were concerned about the implication that your government had engaged in improper election practices. I observed that you have categorically and consistently denied all malfeasance allegations and attributed them to the harsh political environment. I wish to assure you where is that? Oh, no, I got, hold on. I wish to assure you that from the outset, I acted on the basis that my mandate did not encompass passing judgment on these matters. I deliberately refrained from seeking evidence on these issues. Throughout the process, I consciously steered clear of party political issues and proceeded on the premise of service to the national interest. Dominicans need to have a big problem with this because part of the remit of Dennis Byron, in the terms of reference, was to examine the reports from the observer missions, the recommendations that had been made, etc., through the years, and to look at what had come before his assignment on the question of electoral reform. One of the reports, for example, that would have been available to Sir Dennis Byron from an election observer was the 2014 Commonwealth Observer Mission report, which concluded that the elections that year may have been free but not necessarily fair because of numerous instances of bribery and cheating, including the transportation of voters from overseas and the abuse of incumbency, in the lack of impartiality in the distribution of public services. So he had a responsibility to look at that. He brushed it aside as politicking because, as far as he is concerned, Roosevelt Skerrit denied all malfeasance allegations, right? Roosevelt Skerrit is the incumbent. The only incumbent the only abuse of incumbency that the 2014 Commonwealth Observer Mission report could have been referring to would have been behavior and conduct of Roosevelt Skerrit and his administration. They were the incumbents. Yet, Sir Byron, without examining any evidence, he says he agrees with Skerrit that this is all politics and he's not getting involved in it. But the court in which he sat as president recognized from cases about Dominica election that were brought before the court within the space of about a year and a half. 2 election matters, one from 2014, one from 2019, came before the CCJ. And the CCJ saw enough in what was presented to it to make the observation that this is a tainted electoral process and you need not go into another election with these or similar taints.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Lennox. Let's go back to what the caller asked, and that's exactly the question he's asking. You just made the point. And this is what I think we don't want to spend too much time about Byron. It's not we pass Byron now. What I think the caller is saying is that didn't Byron sit on the CCJ as president? Why is it that he's not sharing the views of his colleagues?
Let me tell you, you may want to park Dennis Byron on the side. For the purpose of allowing the public to understand what went down, it's important to address the nature of his work, which was supposed to have been independent, it was supposed to have been fair, it was supposed to have been impartial it was supposed to have been objective. It was none of those things. It really was an exercise where he focused, as he's indicating here in his letter, on what was good for Skerrit.
No, but we agree on that.
Good.
As a matter of fact, as a matter of
The other side,
no. As a matter of fact, Lennox, let me just say this. As a matter of fact, you remember I said very early in my opening remarks, we have all agreed that we should dismiss, I quoted Dr. Andrew, we should dismiss Dennis Byron's findings because we can see that they were really not intended to do anything like what we wanted to do, but intended only to perpetuate what was going on right now, right? I think we all agree on that. That's what the man's intention was.
Yeah.
But Lennox, what I really wanted to do, I wanted to go back to your submission. I didn't want to let's just gloss over your submission because you see the submission that you made was quite elaborate. It was substantial. It was really to the point, and it provided. You made a few headlines there. Tomorrow at midday, I don't know what's going to happen on the hot seat tomorrow morning, but I expect us to be discussing this 9 something billion dollars and this 43,240. I expect that to be the headline for the midday news tomorrow because it seems to me this is breaking news, which Dominicans had no idea what was going on before. And to me, this changes the whole thing. I mean, the Netcliffe has had an ad going on talking about a $4.2 billion that is unaccounted for.
Well, you have to update that. You have to update that. The amount that we cannot account for has not been accounted for is up to $7.2 billion right now.
Let's take a call from Lambie.
Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Hello, good evening.
Go ahead.
So, basically, what I'm understanding from all what is going on is buying time for the government. Because if all those reform and Justice Byron has done all what he has done and hasn't given the people what they deserve. If you look at the American system, the present thing that is going on, Donald Trump is using the same law of America to delay the process. So basically what I'm seeing is buying time for the government to remain there to put things against the people. So now that we do understand what is happening, I think the people should now plan how to move against the government, to stop giving them the time to continue the things that they're doing. That's it. That's the decision we have to take now.
I think we all agree with the caller that the people need to move right ahead now. The call is right. Lambi, take another call.
Yes, caller, please go ahead. Caller, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening.
Hello, caller.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
I think we lost that call.
Hello, can you hear me?
I'm hearing the caller, Lambi, but you need to switch over to the caller.
Hello.
Yes, caller, we're hearing you. So I don't know whether you want to go ahead with your call.
Yeah. Okay. I was listening to Lennox, and he made a comment regarding the chairman of the Electoral Commission and being silent. And I'm worried about that because the Constitution doesn't give the chairman of the commission any authority to make public comments. The commission can report to the president. If laws are being proposed, they can be submitted to the commission for their to give input on the legislation, but I don't think there's any requirement on the Constitution to allow the chairman of the commission.
Okay, let's try to deal with that. Did you have another question? Because otherwise we'll try to deal with the question.
That's all I want to say. That's all I want to say.
Okay, so Lennox, would you like to take a shot? Or would you rather Dr. Andre take a shot?
No, the concern of the caller is that I indicated that nothing has been heard from the chairman of the commission since the 12th when the report was released. I don't know if the caller is aware that throughout this consultative exercise of Dennis Byron, the Electoral Commission was right there with him. Matter of fact, in the report, he indicates that for the proposals that were made with respect to the Registration of Electors Act, he reached consensus with the Electoral Commission. So the Electoral Commission is not exactly a silent or innocent partner in all, or innocent entity in all of this. They have had numerous meetings. Members of the commission has had numerous meetings with Sir Dennis Barron on these proposals. As a matter of fact, before the issue of his final report, he was trying to have a meeting with the commission before the end of May. Right? I'm not saying that there's any specific provision in the Constitution that says in matters like this, the commission must come out and say X or Y. But you see, we're at a stage right now where 5 weeks have gone by, and there were some people saying they don't want the government to be involved in the consultation. The consultation should be done by the Electoral Commission, et cetera, et cetera. And the commission, having worked with Dennis Barron through this consultancy, has nothing to say to the people of Dominica now that the results are out. It is important that we hear from the chairman, because the people of Dominica, regardless of what we hear from the chairman, the people of Dominica will have their say. But it would be good, having partnered with the Byron in this consultancy exercise, that something is said right now. There was. Did you hear Sheridan, Gregoire? Did you hear Irving, Andre, that the chairman of the commission was accusing Dennis Barron as trying to break up the commission, trying to sow division in the commission, in the way things all ended?
Let's not answer.
Did you hear that?
Let's not answer that. Let's take a call from Lambi. Let's take a call. I'll come back to you, Dr. Andre, on that.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Andre, you're wrong.
Hold on. Good evening, caller. Please go ahead on the overseas line. Caller on the overseas line, are you listening? No.
Okay, we don't have the call on the line. Now, Dr. Andre, I don't know if you wanted to take up for Lennox left off there on this matter there.
Well, in my view, what is of even greater concern is that clearly under the direction of the leadership of the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, they've been very derelict in their duty. Let me give you an example. In terms of the cleaning of the voters list, the Constitution says, quite frankly, well, not the Constitution, electoral laws, I'm sorry, that anyone who's been resident overseas for more in excess of 5 years, quite frankly, should not be on that list. Years ago, the senior advisor, legal advisor to the government, took the position, reported in DNO, that the commission lacks the authority to clean the voters list of persons who have been resident abroad for more than 5 years. And guess what? The commission meekly acquiesced to that bogus legal interpretation. Because if you take that argument to its logical conclusion, that is a recipe for cheating. That is a recipe for people who've been abroad for 30, 40 years to come and vote in clear violation of Dominica's electoral laws. But they accepted it. They accepted it in a very docile fashion, despite the fact that on that commission you had 2 or 3 lawyers. So what we have in here now is a gross dereliction of duty by the chairperson and by the majoritarian view on the Electoral Commission. Unconscionable, permissible only in Dominica. That's the problem.
You know, but the problem goes even deeper than that. I mean, Lambi, if you have a call, just wave and we'll take it, right? The problem goes deeper than that. Oh, let's take a call, Lambi. Go ahead.
Overseas line again. Go ahead.
Greetings, gentlemen.
Greetings.
I have a question. Was it legal and constitutional for the man holding the office of Prime Minister to hire Dennis Byron to pay him to do that such consultation or whatever review of the electoral process? Is it constitutional and legal that the Prime Minister or the government or minister should have done that?
Anybody wants to take that up?
Well, there are certainly conflicting views on that issue. I mean, there are views that stand for the proposition that the Prime Minister lacked the authority, constitutional authority to have done so. Others say that, well, he quite frankly can can appoint whoever he wants to advise him with respect to with respect to Dominica's electoral laws. The more interesting question is, what do we do with those recommendations? Do we accept them as being delivered on tablets of stone, or do we regard them for what they are, a recipe for the perpetuation in government of the electorate? And what do we do with that realization? Do we play meek as sheep, or would you stand up and say, no, we cannot afford to lose Dominica for nobody? That's the question.
Well, one of my concerns, as I said, about the Electoral Commission is that we know for a fact that the reason why the members who are there who represent the government or the Dominican Labour Party, the only reason they are there is to stall the electoral reform process. I don't know what else we're going to ask of them, because that is why they were brought on. You remember that famous letter which you reported on so much, Lennox. You know, so many reports on that letter, that famous email. And then the direct result of that was the people who were there. I think it was Kwandwani and Richie Charles. They were immediately removed, and two other people were put on. And since that time, the whole electoral process was stalled. What is it that we can expect to have from this electoral commission when these are the people who brought there for that specific purpose? This is the problem. And that is why I agree with the recommendation, and it might require a constitutional amendment, but the Electoral Commission must be expanded to more people to eliminate the political influence, particularly from the incumbent in office. That's very important. And then, of course, the additional recommended that it must have its specific amount of money budgeted for it. And it should not be the Minister for Finance responsible for making that money, because we know what happened when the Electoral Commission, I think they may have even brought down equipment for doing the voter ID cards. But then when they asked for money to continue the work, the finance minister did not give them the money, as far as we're aware. So this is the problems of the Electoral Commission as it is currently constituted. And I think we need to get past thinking that this Electoral Commission will do it. And it is very clear, you know, when I listen to some of the other members who do not represent the Labour Party, they're saying the same thing we're saying. I'm hearing them saying that they're frustrated about what's going on in there. And since this thing has been changed with the new representatives and so on, everything stalled, everything crashed. But Lennox, before Lambi takes another call, Lambi, if you have a call, just give you a wave, we'll know. But I wanted to go back again to your contribution, Lennox, because I certainly enjoyed your contribution tremendously. I mean, I saw the length of detail, not only the revelation, the breaking news of this $9 billion.
Yeah, well,
You know something, Dominicans don't know what's going on in their country, you know.
yeah,
Dominicans
well,
understand that their government has been controlled. Where is all that money? Who's controlling it? Whoever controlling that money, controlling the country, they controlling the government.
well, but we are focused on reforming our electoral process, because for a number of years the evidence before us is that it has been captured. It has been abused by the Labour Party. The head of the Labour Party, which is now defunct, to get results in his favor. But get results in his favor to do what? The evidence before us is that the resources of the country, the resources coming from the sale of Dominican passports, are not under the control of the people who have quote unquote been put in the government. It's not the government that controls it. They have somebody overseas, some foreigner from Lebanon, who has more control over the resources of Dominica from the sale of its passports than anybody in the government in Dominica that the people are supposed to be voting for. And then you go to how governments get captured. governments get hijacked. We're talking about the hijack of the Labour Party now from the comments of Matthew Walter, the former Labour Party veteran minister. But we also have the capture of Dominica to talk about, the hijack of the resources of Dominica to talk about, and the placement of those resources under the control of foreign friends of the Prime Minister. So if we cannot get control of our electoral process, if the people's electoral process cannot be returned to right order, where it is fit for the purpose of getting the people to elect government of the people, by the people, for the people, with the majority votes of conscience, the resources of this country will continue to remain in foreign hands and be plundered at will by those foreign interests. Long before Anthony Hayden came to Dominica, you had two representatives of range capital partners that made off with $163 million of Dominica's passport money before the Kempinski Hotel opened its doors to receive one guest, And then all of the abuse through the housing option of the program surfaced after that through Skerritt and Hayden. And we are burdened with that today. We're seeing the numbers rising. We will hear next week when the government comes to present a budget what it has spent on the international airport so far. And we'll try to put our minds to whether we have that amount of value in what is on the ground and whether or not we're going to get an international airport. But money is spending and people are getting their fair and more than their fair share of the monies that are being spent, that are not being accounted for. All of those are consequences. We are reaping what we sow by not having an electoral process that is fit for the purpose of changing people in government, of bringing the people's sanction to bear on those who misbehave in government. But those who misbehave in government are those who are responsible for the system and those who will decide whether or not they give us the reforms that we, the people, have been asking for. And this is what is so ugly about this. This is why I have a gut feeling that it's not going to end well. The people are going to have to do something unusual for them to get to this place where they are able to have an electoral process through which they can elect the government of their choice, and they can move ahead with the rescue of Dominica, so they no longer last in their country. As the senior minister said, we no longer last for too long in this world and behind in too many things. We have to find a way of making this country first and making our citizens first in our country. Dominica first, for the people of Dominica first.
Dr. Andre, I have to come back to this talk about Mr. Edward Oliver Leblanc. Can you imagine somebody wants to compare Edward Oliver Leblanc's regime, his time in office, with what is going on today? What is this person trying to say? Why are they trying to do that to Mr. Leblanc? I mean, come on, we know about Mr. Leblanc. You've written about the man. You have a lot of. Why is it somebody wants to make that kind of comparison to taint Mr.
Desecration.
Leblanc, desecrate him as good name? Why would they do that?
For a simple reason. They want to put perfume. They want to put perfume where no amount of perfume will cleanse the stench of corruption and graft and greed. This man was the very antithesis of what is corrupt and what is greedy. His disdain for the trappings of wealth, second only to Rosie and to the other prime ministers, Edison James, Patrick John, Oliver, Pierre Charles. None of them enriched themselves at the expense of poor people in Dominica. That's just the bottom line. The evidence is clear. No amount of comments from the disciples of deception and deceit can change that. You see, you can only support evil if somehow you are benefiting from it, or your sins or transgressions, criminal or otherwise, are being erased in exchange for your support. So that explains the orgy that is taking place on the other two radio stations. You see, fighting for what is right is not necessarily a very popular thing. It requires a lot of courage. It requires vilification. It requires, and it is often greeted by condemnation. But you must hold the fort because you're animated by the fact that greed and corruption, they have one thing in common with these nice little pullets that grow into hens that lay eggs. They always come home to roost. That's the problem.
So, Dr. Andre, I want to bring us back now to why we're here tonight. Because, time has a way of running out on us, and we don't have that much time left. I want to bring us back to what we're doing. You've made the point, Lennox had made the point so eloquently. We've run the course. We've demystified the whole thing about all the electoral reforms. We've read the draft laws prepared and submitted by Sir Dennis Byron. We've dismissed some of the recommendations made. We said you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we did pay $600,000 for this thing. We have to extricate from it what we don't want, and we have to use the things that we want in it. But the most critical thing, I think, as Lennox said it very well, the ideas that you've accumulated, which incorporate all of the people's ideas. I know that the majority of Dominicans, right-thinking Dominicans, agree with everything that you have said here tonight, with everything that Lennox has said. One of our callers said, listen, well, the next thing to do is to get moving. I think, Dr. Andre, there's nobody disagreeing except one or two voices who have not even read the document, but they have been set up to say, look, don't worry about these fellas. That's all they can say. Don't worry about those guys. But they have not read the documents. They don't really know. They just want to, when somebody comes there, they'll clap and say, yes, senior, or whatever it is. But the fact of the matter is, what needs to happen now? Those recommendations that you clearly spell, or that Lennox clearly spelled out, and Lennox put it this way, he said, we must now ensure that we put those things, and even give us the various sections and the items that would go in the various sections. On the right, you did that, didn't you, Lennox? And Dr. Andre, I think we all agree that that is the way to go. I believe we can find an attorney. The people of Dominica can find an attorney who could do exactly what Lennox is saying. Fix those subsections in those various draft laws and make them palatable, make them into what the Dominican people really want. And then the Dominican people, like the caller said, who say, listen, now that we have a document, a legal document, which we can show to the rest of the world, we can show to the OAS, to CARICOM, to the UN, to everybody, and we can present to the government and say, this is what we want to go to Parliament, and present it to the Electoral Commission, present to the People's Attorney General. That is what the People's Attorney General is there, supposed to be there for. And to say, listen, this is what we want tabled in Parliament. This is what we want to be in the national discourse. We don't know what has happened yet. I know the Prime Minister said he appointed Dr. Kenneth Darrow to the consult. Has he had one yet? Have we heard of one that he has had? I don't know. If they have in this consultation, must be very, very private, a well-kept secret. I haven't heard of any yet. The fact of the matter is, we've come to that hour where we have agreed, by and large, because I heard the Freedom Party people here were here with me, they agreed by and large to those recommendations. And Noelis Knight, who's the attorney on that panel, she certainly said, and she said the right thing, Dr. Andre. She said, yes, this is all okay, but there are one or two of them that we have that require constitutional amendments that we can phase in a little later on. That is fine. I mean, that is understandable, as long as these are not delayed too long. But the fact of the matter is, we need to move on with this. And what I'm suggesting, I understand that the business forum, which did that first consultation and gave a report to Sir Dennis Byron and the other people a couple of years ago, I understand they're meeting again. And I hope that they're serious about this, and that all the people, and I hope all the political parties will be well represented, and all the civic organizations. the Chamber of Commerce, the Employers Federation. I hope all of these organizations, the civic groups, the unions, I hope they will all go there. And I hope they will, and I'm pretty sure that they've been listening. And we've heard some of their contributions already. They, to a large extent, agree with the recommendation being made. I hope everybody can go there and agree on some recommendations. The churches are there. I know Pastor Rodney, this is happening in his church, this consultation. I hope they can take these ideas, Dr. Andre. I don't know whether you might need to update that list. If anything new that you've put in there, if it is necessary, we can update that and we can offer them that. I would personally be willing on behalf of Netcliffe to sit on that panel. And I know that they will very likely will invite you to make a presentation there. I'm pretty sure that you might be able to give them a written document with your updated list, which they can then use and even take a vote on if they need to. Because it seems to me that something needs to happen to move the process forward. And to my mind, everybody should agree on something, give it to an attorney, let them put it into the laws, right? So we have something to work with. And I strongly agree also that once you have that document, every effort should be made. And I'm being guided and mindful of what Lennox said and then what the CCJ said, because if this thing is not done in a civilized way, it will turn ugly. So we have to keep it civil or it will turn ugly. I think Dominicans are getting very angry, and I listen to people, they're getting angry, and I don't think that's a good thing for our society, okay? So the next steps, I hope, Dr. Andre, tell me what your thoughts are on that. Get this thing to this group of people. I hope they bring everybody together. Let them, if you make a presentation to them. And let's agree that we're going forward with this and then take the next steps. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Let me indicate that certainly the Business Bureau, and I don't know the full complement of their membership, but I can say as a sector, probably no other sector has taken as great a hit by the policies of the existing administration than the business. And I might have more to say about that next week, to be quite frank with you. So they are keenly aware of the need for electoral reform, for investing, and for empowering people with the option of exercising their vote in a meaningful fashion, and for being able to effect change if they so desire. Let me just throw one question at this point. Can you imagine, you're a businessman yourself, successful one, how much $240 million would have done for the Dominican economy, Mr. G? Can you imagine the items to be bought from the various stores, whether appliances, whether furniture, whatever it is, the amount of persons who could have been employed, the amount of businesses that could have been supported, the amount of money, the multiplier effect as the economists talk about, of that amount of money in the local economy. Can you imagine the number of local businesses that have been displaced? Can you imagine those businesses that have been singled out and the public told, don't support, don't shop at these places? The business sector is hurting. There are persons who, by Dominican standards, are successful, but many others are hurting in silence because the sort of retribution will come down viciously over their heads. What about those hoteliers who've been made fun of while being starved of any assistance? Punitively. Why? Because they are believed to support the opposition. So make no mistake about it, the business sector has taken a lot of blows. So they understand in very concrete terms the significance of electoral reform. And that is why, in my view, without knowing all of their members, they will be keenly supportive of those measures that can empower Dominicans ordinarily resident in Dominica. But the next point is, even after we've presented in written form all those proposed amendments, we know based on the past, that they will not find a welcoming home in the political directorate based on what has transpired before. So it will come back to the very same question. What will Dominicans do to protect their heritage and their homeland? That is the fundamental question.
Well, yes, that is a fundamental question. But Lennox, let's touch back a little bit on the private sector, because Dr. Andre is talking about the private sector knows the impact it's having on them. When you talk about $240 million, that is no joke. Can you imagine how much clicking you're going to get in cash registers if all that money was there? Cash registers would be clicking. Some little stores, they're not making more than 2 sales a day. Some of them might even sell $100 a day. Can you imagine if you had pumped this 240 million there? These people would have to get a couple more cash registers to put there. The cash registers will be clicking all day long. The VAT to the government could have collected so much more VAT. But let us not even go there. Let's ask Jerry Brisbane if he felt the impact of that regime. Let's see what happened. All these companies, all these businesses that are shut down and are no longer operational. We can name a whole long list of them. Let us also look at, Lennox, as you said, all these billions of dollars out there. We don't need nobody to front load anything. Why? Because this money is there. But then you see, if you go to tender, right, and you put this thing out in accordance with the procurement laws of Dominica, then it means some local contractors might get work. They might dare to order things from Astafan and from Nasif and from Fuad Issa and from, from mostly from the local businesses, from the plumbing people and the electrical, and all this money might very likely, these people might have to order stuff for the airport, right? So, but now when you have people say they front loading, the things coming in big containers from outside, not a penny coming through some of those local shops, some of them. So Lennox, let's talk about that a little bit. You want to unmute your mic?
Yeah. First of all, Sheridan, on this question of the $214 million, which according to the Prime Minister is leaving Dominica annually through business money transfer services like MoneyGram and Western Union. $214 million is more than the public sector wage bill for an entire year, significantly more than the public sector wage bill. And that is largely financed from the sale of Dominican citizenships. It is those construction projects that are financed either, directly from passport sales or the housing through the government or somewhere there, but it all goes back to citizenship revenues, the majority of it. And you ask yourself the question, why is it that Dominicans can be unemployed, underemployed, starving for money when so many foreigners can come in the country and make not $214 million, because the money they make has to be more than that, because they have to live in Dominica to make that money to send overseas. So you can see it is somewhere in the region of, let's say, $350 million that they made in order to be able to send back $214 million to their friends and family back home. And this is a situation in a country where the ruling party takes the money belonging to the people, buys tickets to go to test cricket, passes the tickets to its handlers in the party, and distributes it to the labor rights of Dominica or the members of the Skerrit family party. And the majority of them cannot afford to use the free ticket to go into the park to watch cricket, so they're trying to sell it outside of the Windsor Park Stadium, and police are hustling them, threatening them with criminal action for selling the tickets that they cannot afford to use. That is the state of Dominica today. These are all part of the consequences of not having free and fair elections and a country not being able to select government of the people, by the people, for the people, that will work in the interest of the people, that will do the right by the people, instead of focusing exclusively on amassing their mansions and their millions, and not giving what two hoots whether all of the resources of the country, the majority of the resources of this country, are under the control of their foreign friends to do as they please and to treat like their own personal ATM in foreign lands. I mean, we have to wake up. Matthew Walter is asking the labor rights to wake up. I'm asking Dominicans to wake up and understand where we are and what we collectively need to do to move on. One of the first responsibilities on us is to secure our electoral process, to make it fit for the purpose of us, the majority, being able to appoint, being able to vote for, select a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And when we do that, we'll begin the rescue mission of our country. We'll begin the process of making our Dominica first again, so that we no longer have to hear these laments of the members of the Scared Party that Dominica has been last for too long in this world and behind in too many things. We'll put Dominica first. We'll put our young people to work, and we'll make sure that our Dominica is working for all of the sons and daughters of Dominica. But we cannot get any of that done if we don't take back control of our electoral process. That is job number one.
Lennox, you worked in the private sector. I still want to come back to you for your closing remarks. You worked in the
Well,
private
Sheridan,
sector.
I need you to take one thing in consideration. These days of my life, I find myself having to wake up at a very early time in the morning, and so
Yes.
I have
So,
some things to do in the morning,
so that
and
is
so
why that is
yeah,
why I'm talking about your closing remarks.
okay.
But as I talk to you about that, I just want to sound a little note here, Lennox, because I spoke about this consultation taking place on the 27th of July at Pastor Rodney's church at 9 o'clock in the morning. But I mean, I want us to remember we need to alert the private sector. Can you imagine what $214 million would have meant to companies like Burton and Company? They do electrical stuff. I mean, you have to how much electrical stuff for the airport for all these projects. Can you imagine what that would have done for them? For
Yep,
Early Dubini,
yep.
for D&B Plumbing, for ISA Trading, for Muslim stuff, for a whole host of these companies, the small businesses and others that are in Dominica. For these young entrepreneurs who are making local products, adding value to local raw materials and doing that. Can you imagine the jobs, the truckers, the bus drivers? So I'm just saying that the reality of this thing is that when we're talking about this electoral reform, we've already broken the thing down to see what the things that need to be done. We have recommended specific recommendations now. But the fact all of that is for the purpose of improving the lives of all these people, improving the business community, improving the business environment, making it more profitable for local business. That is why we hope that the trade unions, the private sector, the employers federation, all these organizations will participate in coming down to the final thing that is required to get electoral reform. And I know in the past the private sector has played a major role. The unions have played a major role. I hope they play that role again so we can have a very civil way of getting to our electoral reforms, getting to free and fair elections, getting into a level playing field and good governance. Lennox, your final thoughts?
My final thoughts, Sheridan, go back to the. My final thoughts go back to the. Hmm, yeah, go back to the admonition of the Caribbean Court of Justice. July 2022. Without free and fair elections, the preambular value of the creation and maintenance and respect for lawfully constituted authority would be fatally undermined. The consequences of such a denial that a reflection on Caribbean history demonstrates include loss of legitimacy, public unrest, and even revolt. In contemporary terms, free and fair elections are so fundamental to the democratic way of life that without it, the very legitimacy and sovereignty of the constitutional state is brought into question, constituted as is by the people of Dominica. In this regard, it is worth reminding ourselves the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority, the legitimacy of government. End of quote. And I quote the Apex Court to say that we are at a very important phase in our march to secure democracy against the onslaught of dictatorship in this country. We have come this far. We have work still to be done. And the critical thing now is whether those who are in office are going to allow the people's reforms to take effect so that the process is fixed and made fit for purpose, or whether they're going to arrogantly, dictatorially, oppressively continue to deny the people of this country the right to free and fair elections. They're going to continue to do that. And they're going to continue to uphold their illegitimacy. Then, as the CCJ has warned us, there will be public unrest and even revolt in Dominica. That's not what we want. We believe there is a civil solution ahead of us, which involves taking on board the recommendations now for amending the proposals for revising our electoral laws that will give true effect to real reform of the process. That's available to us right now, and we can take it, or we can refuse it and deny the people the right to free and fair elections, which will lead to very unpleasant results. Thank you, Sheridan.
Lennox, thanks a lot for that.
Thank you, Irving and Andre. God bless you.
Now, Irving,
Thank you, Lennox.
Lennox has made some points there, and he wants to go the civil way, which is what we all want. You have written extensively about Dominica's history. I'm sure you wrote, and you have much information on the Committee for National Salvation on the 1979 unrest. I'm sure that you are very much aware that presidents had to flee the country. The kind of 100 and how many days, somebody said the hospital will not work, the nurses will not work, the firemen, the police will not work, the port workers will not work. Remember that? Now, Lennox is saying, let's take the civil, but I listened to a senior counsel talking about, this constitutional cool wash brigade, but Lennox is saying, no, let's not go that way.
Yep. The constitutional cool wash brigade.
Right? Lennox is saying, let's not go that way, let's go the civil way. Dr. Andre, your closing comments.
The unfortunate reality is that when people become so caught up in a sense of power, when they become convinced of their own invincibility, they recognize no boundaries in terms of what they will do to maintain that hegemonic control over their kingdom. They assume heirs. They start to believe that no one can displace them on the throne that they've erected. They believe they can get away with everything. They believe that everyone can be bought. They become like Macbeth in Shakespeare's play. No man or woman born can defeat him. And that is the sorry state of affairs that we face. We've reached a stage where there is a perception, aided and abetted by the disciples of deceit, those who trumpet the cause every day on other radio stations. Because if they don't, they will lose the protection that the regime affords them. Protection from wrongdoing, protection from victims of the passing of bad checks, protection from other acts of malfeasance and, quite frankly, chicanery and trickery. So they have to be on the radio every day, singing virtue or looking for virtue where none exists. And the time will come, and the time has come, when we have to stand and say, what do we do to protect what is most valuable to us? What do we do to protect that? Because this involves a matter of life and even death. Many people, and I've alluded to some before, have lost their jobs, have lost their livelihoods, have lost opportunities for protection, opportunities to make a living, opportunities to operate businesses, opportunities for chances for their investments to succeed. And I'll have more to say about that to the Business Bureau if I'm invited to speak and so on. So this is very, very serious stuff. And the examples in our region are clear. Our fellow brothers and sisters in the Caribbean have not hesitated to advocate on their own behalf, to take up the sword or the cause of righteousness, to stand firm and to say enough is enough. We will not allow, what's the song again? Pa kite yo pondam nek hodnu. So this is where we are in terms of at this juncture of our history. It has never been under this type of existential threat that it faces today. Go ask the people in Marigot, in fact, those who dared even open their mouths. Go ask those who've lost their homes and now live in apartments they don't own, who have to bear the stench of a malfunctioning sewage, but they bear it in silence, because to open their mouths would lead to dismissal from the rental unit. So that's how they're held in check, in virtual thraldom. And the question is, how many more has to suffer, according to Bob Marley? And we as patriots, citizens, who have a voice, who can see, who can hear, who can talk, who can influence others, we have an obligation to say, look, it doesn't have to be this way. The strength lies within you, the strength to save your nation, the strength to embrace that future, articulated so eloquently in Arundel Thomas's poem that I read this evening. So with those words, I leave you. The future is ours to remold, to shape, to create. The question is, are we ready to assume that Herculean task? I believe we are, but we just have to discover that realization. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. I believe on this program, the Global View on Q, we've done our work. We've heard from Dr. Andre, we've heard from Lennox, we've heard from Edison James, we've heard from people in the Freedom Party. We have so many people who have been on this program and talked about electoral reform. And they informed some of the recommendations that Dr. Andre has so eloquently put together. All right. So I think the way forward, gentlemen, is as we've said, and I look forward because I have not heard, as I said, of a single consultation spearheaded by Dr. Kenneth Darrow yet. I don't know whether he's maybe still trying to read the document, but I have not heard of one consultation that he has already spearheaded. But needless to say, that the work has been done. These consultations that Dr. Darrow is going to do should use the work that we've done here to inform the consultations that he might have. Certainly, the work that has been done here can inform the consultation that the Business Forum is going to have on the 27th of July at 9 o'clock at Sir Pastor Rodney's church. I hope all the political parties send their members there, all of the unions, the civic organizations, fill up the room, make their voices heard, because this probably will be the only significant consultations which will be real, will be those that are being done by the private sector, not those that Dr. Darrow might be spearheading, because we know the intent. It is to not make any changes that are going to affect the winning legacy of Mr. Skerritt. Everybody knows that. This is the real thing. So Dr. Andre and Lennox, I want to thank you so much for all that you've done. All that you've done for country, and all that you will continue to do, I am sure. I want to thank all the persons who are with us on Facebook still, and who are with us on YouTube, and who are listening to us everywhere. I hope what we did tonight added to the edification that we try to bring. I hope it has been informative. I hope it has been edifying. And I hope that you agree with us, because we have tried to represent your views in those recommendations that were made here tonight. And I hope that everyone will get together with one voice, and sing from the same hymn sheet with those recommendations, and make their voices known, so that we can avoid what Lennox is trying desperately to avoid, which is what the CCJ thought could happen to us. Lennox is saying, let's not make that happen to us. Let's do the civil way. We agree on that. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you. Thank Sherwin. And let me
Thank you very much.
Very good evening to everybody.
Thanks, Mr. Linton.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
G,
God
Mr.
bless.
Lambie.
God bless. Thanks.
Everybody on
Thanks.
Facebook, on YouTube. Thanks a lot, everybody.
G.
Have a good night.
God bless. All the best.
Tomorrow morning, I will be listening to the hot seat.
All right.
I want to hear more about this $9 billion.
All right. All the best.
Thank you, everybody. Listeners, panelists, Mr. G, Lambie, everybody. Sherwin, thank you. Let me put this off. Or at least you.
Looking out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by